You awaken slowly, or perhaps you are simply drifting, a wisp of consciousness settling gently upon the currents of time. The air around you is cool, carrying with it the faint, ancient scent of damp earth and wood smoke, a fragrance that has clung to human dwellings for centuries. It is not the sharp, clean coolness of a modern breeze, but something deeper, richer, imbued with the dust of ages. You feel the subtle shift beneath you, a firmness that yields just enough, a mattress filled with dried straw or leaves, rustling faintly with each breath you take. There is no urgency in this awakening, no sudden jolt into the day. Instead, it is a slow unfurling, like a tightly furled leaf responding to the first touch of morning sun. The light that filters into this space is not the bright, electric glare you know. It is soft, diffused, a gentle gray that speaks of dawn, but a dawn unhurried and shy. It seeps through small, unglazed window openings, perhaps covered with stretched animal hide or thin cloth, softening the edges of the room. Shapes begin to emerge from the shadows. The rough-hewn beams of the ceiling, darkened with years of smoke. The uneven surface of a packed earth floor. The sturdy, simple furniture crafted from local timber. There is a profound quiet, broken only by the distant, muted sounds of a world slowly stirring. Perhaps the lowing of a cow from a nearby byre, or the faint clatter of a distant bucket, or the rustle of a mouse in the thatch above. It is a quiet that invites introspection, a stillness that hums with the presence of things unseen, a silent invitation to simply be. You are not observing this world. You are in it, feeling the textures of its air, the weight of its silence, the subtle rhythm of its awakening. Your breath comes easily, a soft rise and fall in the stillness, and for a moment, time itself seems to suspend, allowing you to settle gently into this forgotten space, this quiet past. The cool air brushes against your bare arm where the rough-spun blanket has slipped away, a tangible connection to the chill of the morning, a sensation that grounds you in this unfolding reality. There is no clock marking the seconds, only the gradual brightening of the eastern sky, a slow, patient unveiling of the day. The sounds outside remain distant, like echoes from another realm, yet they are part of this world's fabric. The soft rustle of leaves, the barely perceptible drip of condensation from the eaves. You feel the firmness of the straw beneath your head, shaping itself to your form, a simple comfort. This is a place where every sensation is amplified, where the absence of modern clamor allows for a deeper resonance with the elemental. Your awareness expands beyond the confines of the room, feeling the vast, quiet expanse of the land beyond. The sleeping fields, the winding pathways waiting for the day's first travelers. There is a sense of belonging here, not just to a place, but to a different flow of existence, where human life aligns with the unhurried pulse of nature. The lingering scent of the night, a mix of damp earth and something wild, slowly begins to yield to the fresher, sharper scent of dew and growing things. You do not try to understand it or name it, you simply let it wash over you. A silent promise of the day to come. The cool air, as it drifts through the slight gaps in the walls, brings with it the faint, sharp aroma of wood being split in the distance. A sound that is both near and far, a steady rhythm that reassures. Your eyes, now fully open, trace the rough-hewn lines of the ceiling beams, darkened by centuries of smoke, each crack and knot a tiny record of time's passage. This quiet unfolding is a gentle hand, guiding you deeper into the textures and breaths of this forgotten morning. The world you now inhabit is woven from the very earth beneath your feet and the trees that rise from it. Buildings are not grand, towering structures of glass and steel, but humble, solid forms, mostly wood and daub, or sometimes stone where it is plentiful. Their walls are thick, imperfect, bearing the marks of hands that shaped them, not machines. The thatch on the roofs is deep and shaggy, a living blanket woven from reeds or straw, providing insulation against the biting cold of winter and the heavy warmth of summer. From these roofs, the slow drip of rainwater can be heard after a shower. a gentle, rhythmic patter against the packed earth below. Smoke, a constant companion, curls from central hearths, finding its way out through a simple hole in the roof or a crude chimney, lending the air a perpetual scent of wood smoke, of warming meals, of human presence. This scent clings to everything. To clothes, to hair, to the very fabric of the dwelling, a comforting, pervasive aroma that signals life and warmth within. The ground underfoot is rarely smooth. Inside, it might be tamped earth, softened by rushes or woven mats, carrying the faint, earthy smell of soil and dry plant matter, subtly mixed with the lingering scent of human habitation and cooking. Outside, it is often simply mud, churned by feet and hooves, especially after rain, or hard-baked dirt in the unrelenting sun. Stones, rough and uneven, might form rudimentary pathways or the foundations of more substantial structures. Your feet feel the unevenness, the subtle give of the earth, the cool firmness of stone. There is no asphalt, no concrete, only the raw, ancient surface of the land itself, directly responsive to the seasons and the weather. Every step is an engagement with the ground, a negotiation of its natural contours. The cold dampness of early morning dew on the grass, the dry crunch of fallen leaves in autumn, the clinging mud of spring. These are immediate, unmediated sensations, felt keenly through simple leather or fabric coverings on the feet. Sounds here are organic, elemental. The lowing of cattle from a nearby pasture, the bleating of sheep from the common grazing lands, the distant crow of a rooster marking the passage of time without clocks. These are the pervasive background hum. The rustle of wind through tall grass or the leaves of trees, a constant natural whisper, ever present. The splash of water drawn from a well, the creak of its pulley, the distant rhythm of a cooper hammering staves, or a blacksmith's steady clang echoing from the edge of the village. Inside, the crackle and hiss of a fire, the soft thud of kneading dough against a wooden board, the quiet murmur of voices engaged in daily tasks. There are no sudden, jarring noises, no roar of engines or blare of horns. The soundscape is fluid, alive with the subtle workings of life, punctuated by the deliberate movements of human and animal. The distant barking of a dog, the flight of a flock of birds, the gentle buzzing of bees around flowering plants. These small sounds fill the air, creating a rich tapestry of acoustic detail. Even silence here is not empty. It is filled with the presence of nature, the subtle hum of insects, the gentle sigh of the wind, the almost imperceptible drip of water from melting ice in winter. Textures are immediate and honest. The rough, unplaned surface of timber, its splinters a constant reminder of its raw origins, the cool, grainy feel of stone absorbing and radiating the day's warmth or night's chill, the dry, brittle touch of straw crumbling slightly between your fingers. Wool, often coarse and undyed, scratches against the skin, yet provides essential warmth, its lanolin scent a reminder of its animal origin. Linen, spun by hand, feels softer, but still far from the refined smoothness of modern fabrics, retaining a subtle irregularities from its hand processing. Clay pots, unglazed and porous, hold water and food. Their surface is cool and slightly gritty to the touch, often smelling faintly of damp earth or the stored contents. Metal, when present, is usually iron, heavy and strong, often blackened by fire, its surface sometimes pitted from the blacksmith's hammer, giving it a tactile history. Your fingers learn the language of these materials, their weight, their coolness, their subtle imperfections, each touch a conversation with the tangible world. Even the feel of the rope of a well bucket, rough and frayed, speaks of repeated use and communal reliance. The unglazed pottery, absorbent and fragile, feels different than the smooth, dense wood of a carved spoon, each object communicating its origin and purpose through touch alone. Natural light dictates the rhythms of the day. There is no artificial illumination to extend the hours of work or leisure beyond the sun's decree. Dawn brings a slow, creeping illumination, a gentle gray that gradually strengthens, revealing the world in a soft, muted palette. Midday sees the sun at its most intense, casting sharp shadows outside, though often muted within dwellings by thick walls and small openings, creating pools of light and deep, cool shadows. As evening approaches, the light softens, turning golden, then deepens into twilight until only the faint glow of the moon and stars or the flicker of a fire remains. Life adapts to this ebb and flow, rising with the sun, settling with its descent. Work is done by the light of day. Evenings are for quieter tasks, for shared warmth by the hearth, for storytelling in the flickering shadows, where faces are illuminated by dancing flames, and the outside world recedes into darkness and silence. The absence of constant, bright light encourages a different way of seeing, an appreciation for subtleties of illumination, for the way a single candle can transform a vast, dark space, making the familiar unfamiliar and drawing people closer around the shared warmth. The eyes accustomed to dimness perceive depth and texture in ways that modern eyes might miss. The tools of this era are extensions of the hand and body, crafted for specific tasks. Often heavy and unrefined, their surface is smoothed by repeated contact with human skin and the persistent friction of work. A wooden plow, dragged by oxen, turns the earth slowly, its blades biting into the soil with a steady, grinding sound, the smell of fresh earth rising behind it. Hand axes split logs with sharp, percussive blows, the scent of fresh wood filling the air, mingling with the scent of human effort. Simple looms weave thread into cloth, with a rhythmic clack and shuttle, the warp and weft creating a tangible manifestation of human patience and skill. Each tool carries the weight of its purpose, the history of its use etched into its worn handle, its sharpened edge, its very form speaking of generations of ingenuity applied to necessity. Daily rhythms are tethered to the cycles of the earth and the demands of subsistence. Planting, harvesting, tending animals, preparing food, mending clothes. These are not hobbies or occasional chores, but the very fabric of existence, demanding constant effort and attention, dictating the flow of the days and seasons, shaping the contours of every life. There is a deeply ingrained understanding of the interdependence between human effort and nature's bounty, a profound respect for the source of all sustenance. Spaces are defined by function and necessity. The single-room dwelling, serving as kitchen, bedroom, and gathering place. Its center always the hearth, radiating warmth and life, the air thick with the memory of countless meals and conversations. The byre, sheltering animals close to human warmth, their soft breathing and warmth a constant presence, their specific animal scent a familiar part of the household air. The communal well, a focal point for gathering and exchange, its cool water drawn up bucket by bucket, a vital resource, its stone lip worn smooth by countless hands. The church, its stone walls cold and echoing, offering spiritual solace and a sense of order, a place of quiet contemplation and communal prayer, its interior often darker and more hushed than any other building. The fields stretching outwards, the source of life. Their contours shaped by generations of labor, their colors shifting with the seasons. Green in spring, golden in summer, brown and fallow in winter. There is a deep connection to the land, a dependency that is felt in every fiber of being, an understanding that life itself is granted by the earth's generosity. Existence here is raw, immediate, and utterly bound to the natural world. It is a life lived in constant dialogue with the elements, with the rhythms of growth and decay, with the simple, unchanging truths of earth and sky. Every action, every material, every sound speaks of a world deeply intertwined with its environment, where survival is a daily, tangible effort, and time is measured by the sun's passage and the turning of the seasons. The faint, earthy smell of the peat burned in some hearths, the pungent aroma of fermenting grains from a small brewery, the crisp smell of drying herbs hung from rafters, all contribute to this sensory tapestry. It's a world that demands a full engagement of the senses, a constant awareness of one's surroundings, a deep, unconscious understanding of the language of the physical world. The wind carried not just scent, but the very breath of the landscape, cold and clean after a frost, or heavy and humid before a summer storm. The simple presence of tools, worn and familiar, spoke of continuous labor, of lives shaped by the demands of the earth. The morning silence in the small wooden house was not an empty quiet, but a full, deep stillness permeated by the subtle sounds of a world still clinging to the edges of sleep. The air inside the dwelling was cool, holding the concentrated scents of the night. The lingering presence of bodies wrapped in rough blankets, the faint sweetness of old straw, and the persistent, comforting aroma of wood smoke that had settled into every fiber of the dwelling. Outside, the first light of dawn, a faint gray through the small window openings, promised another day, but its arrival was slow, unhurried. There was no urgency in this awakening, no sharp demands from the world beyond the threshold. A figure stirred on a bed of straw, a slow unfolding of limbs from beneath a heavy wool blanket. The rough fabric, though warm, held the faint scent of sleep, of accumulated human presence. A hand reached out, tentatively, into the cool air of the room, feeling for the familiar edge of the straw mattress. The body, still heavy with sleep, felt the ingrained aches of daily labor, the stiffness in joints that came with rest on a hard surface. The quiet breath of the sleeper was the only discernible sound, a soft rise and fall in the pervasive stillness. The first task of the morning, almost a ritual, involved touching cold water in a wooden basin. A bucket, perhaps, had been filled from the well the previous evening, its contents now frigid from the night's chill. A small, unadorned wooden basin was lifted, its surface smooth and cool from repeated use, and a splash of the icy water was poured into it. The sound was distinct in the quiet room, a sharp, cold slap against the wood. The air around the basin seemed to grow even colder, radiating the chill of the water. A hand, hesitant, was lowered into the basin. The shock of the cold water against the skin was immediate, a sharp, almost painful jolt that quickly spread through the fingers, then up the arm. There was a reluctance to wash, not a conscious refusal, but a deep physical aversion to the discomfort. The cold penetrated, causing the skin to prickle, to contract. The water felt heavy, resistant, clinging to the skin. It was not a gesture of immersion, of thorough cleansing, but a quick, almost grudging contact, a brief acknowledgement of the day's arrival. Her face was splashed, a few drops catching on the chin, running down the neck. The sensation was sharp, awakening, momentarily cutting through the lingering haze of sleep. But there was no prolonged scrubbing, no lather of soap, no feeling of deep penetration. The water simply lay on the surface of the skin, chilling it before being quickly wiped away with a rough cloth. The skin remained taut, its surface still holding the faint, ingrained scent of sleep, of previous days, of the layers of air that had settled upon it. The process of dressing followed, a layering of familiar fabrics. The innermost garment, a linen shift or a rough tunic, already carried the scent of the body from previous wear, a faint staleness that had become a part of its very fabric. Over this, a scratchy wool clothing layered over an unwashed body. The wool, undyed and often coarse, felt rough against the skin, its fibers catching and pulling. Its texture was a constant, subtle friction, a reminder of its presence. The weight of the layers was comforting against the morning chill, a barrier against the cold air of the dwelling. But beneath these layers, the skin remained as it had been, bearing the subtle film of the day before, the light dust of the house, the ingrained scent of sweat. The odors blending, the pervasive scent of smoke from the hearth, a comforting woody aroma that clung to everything. The deeper, more pungent smell of sweat accumulated from days of labor and the warmth of bodies in sleep. A distinct human tang, the dry, earthy scent of wool, especially when damp, mingling with the faint animal smell of the sheep from which it came. And the sweet, almost decaying smell of straw, the bedding that softened the hard earth floors, releasing its faint, dry aroma. With every shift of weight, these smells did not exist separately, but intermingled, forming a complex, layered atmosphere unique to the dwelling, unique to these bodies within it. They were not perceived as unpleasant in the way a modern nose might detect them, but simply as the natural, unquestioned components of existence, the very breath of life itself. Near the hearth, where the fire had been coaxed back to life, casting its first weak, flickering light, women brushing hair with brushes or combs of wood or bone. The sound was a soft, rhythmic scrape, a gentle tugging as the bristles or teeth moved through thick, unwashed strands. The hair itself held the scent of wood smoke, of the pillow it had rested on, of the accumulated dust of the dwelling. The brushing was not for thorough cleansing, for removing every impurity, but for ordering, for taming, for preparing it for the day's activities. The action was slow, meditative, a quiet ritual of daily preparation. Each stroke released tiny particles of dust, of dried skin, of the very air that had clung to the strands. The hair, once smoothed and tamed, was often braided or simply tied back, keeping it out of the way for daily tasks, its surface retaining its natural oils, its specific human scent. In another part of the dwelling, or perhaps just outside the threshold where the light was clearer, men wiping faces with dry cloth. The cloth, often a piece of worn linen or a rough scrap of wool, would be pulled across the face, a dry friction against the skin. It removed the surface dust, the visible traces of sleep, but imparted no freshness, no deep cleanliness. The feeling was abrasive, a rough scrape rather than a gentle wash. The skin beneath remained largely as it was, its pores holding the accumulated grime, the faint oiliness from the night. The action was quick, perfunctory, a gesture of readiness for the day's demands. There was no water involved, no soft soaking, only the dry physical removal of the most superficial layer. The scent of the cloth itself, dry and faintly dusty, mingled with the existing odors of skin and hair. The absence of mirrors was a profound aspect of this existence. There was no daily confrontation with one's own reflection, no immediate visual judgment of appearance. Self-perception was not shaped by a pristine, unblemished surface, but by touch, by sensation, by the felt presence of one's own body. The hands, running over the face, feeling the texture of the skin, the stray hairs, the subtle grit that might cling to it, offered the primary understanding of one's physical state. There was no external standard of visual cleanliness to strive for. The awareness of one's own scent, of the smell of one's own body, was internalized, a natural part of being. There was no striving for an invisible, odorless cleanliness. This also brought about the privacy of dirt. Dirt was not a source of shame or public discomfort in the way it might be understood in other times. It was a natural consequence of existence, of labor, of living in constant contact with the earth, with animals, with smoke. It was a part of the daily reality, common to all, unremarkable. The layers of clothing, the absence of close visual scrutiny, the acceptance of communal odors, these factors created a kind of inherent privacy around the state of one's skin and body. One's dirt was largely one's own, a personal layer of the world that adhered to the self, unseen by others in a judgmental way. It was not hidden in shame, but simply existed as a fact of life. The air in the house, now filled with the subtle activity of the morning, slowly warmed as the fire took hold. The smells became more distinct, yet remained interwoven. The acrid tang of the wood smoke grew stronger, settling into the fabric of the dwelling. The deep animal scent of wool, warmed by bodies, became more pronounced. And beneath it all, the persistent, earthy sweetness of straw, the foundational smell of their sleeping and waking. These were the smells of life itself, of a body lived in, of a home inhabited fully. Outside the house, the light intensified, painting the rough wooden walls with a brighter, clearer illumination. Sounds from the village began to emerge with greater clarity. The distant thud of an axe, the lowing of cattle being led to pasture, the faint, high-pitched cries of children beginning their day's play. But within the small dwelling, the rhythm remained slow, unhurried. The movements of the bodies were purposeful, economical, honed by repetition. There was no wasted motion, no frantic energy. Each gesture, each touch, each brief sensory input was part of a seamless, unfolding sequence that had been repeated countless times through countless generations. The absence of a pervasive desire for constant physical freshness meant that the body was experienced differently. It was a functional vessel, a tool for labor, a container for life. Its surface was not a canvas to be constantly cleaned and perfected, but a living membrane exposed to the elements, accumulating the traces of its daily interactions with the world. The slight stickiness of unwashed skin, the faint grittiness that might cling to the hands, the subtle oiliness of the hair, these were not aberrations, but the normal state of being. The light continued to filter through the small openings, illuminating the particles of dust that danced in the air, a visible testament to the constant presence of the outside world within the dwelling. These tiny specks, so numerous, settled on surfaces, on clothes, on hair, contributing to the layers that accumulated on everything. The air, though subtly refreshed by the morning's coolness, remained heavy with this persistent, almost imperceptible film of dust, of tiny fibers, of the remnants of yesterday. The daily routine of simply being, of existing within these textures and smells, meant that the very concept of cleanliness was perhaps understood in a different way. It was less about the removal of every visible trace, of every microscopic particle, and more about functional order, about preparing the body for the day's tasks, about maintaining warmth and basic decency. The deeper, more thorough cleansing that might occur, perhaps in a nearby stream on a warmer day, or a rare, more communal visit to a bathhouse in a larger settlement, was an occasional event, not a daily expectation. The feeling of rough fabric against skin that had not been thoroughly washed was a constant sensory input. The wool, in particular, with its coarse fibers and inherent oiliness, absorbed the scents of the body, mingling them with its own sheepy aroma. This created a personal cloud of scent, unique to each individual, yet shared in its general characteristics by all. These odors, blending, the pervasive smoke from the hearth, clinging to every fiber, mingling with a deeper, more intimate scent of sweat that permeated the layers closest to the skin. The dry, earthy smell of the wool, especially when dampened by perspiration, added another layer, and the ever-present, sweetish aroma of straw. From the bedding, from the floor coverings, a constant reminder of the natural world pressing in from every side. The atmosphere in the house was a rich tapestry of these blending smells, creating a sensory environment that was both familiar and profoundly different from a modern understanding of living space. There was no sharp, sterile cleanliness, no antiseptic freshness. Instead, there was an organic complexity, a deeply human scentscape that was simply the way the world was. The air itself seemed to carry the memory of every previous day, every meal, every sleep. The actions of the morning continued their quiet progression. The women, having brushed their hair, might now move to prepare food, their hands deftly working dough, the subtle scent of yeast and flour mixing with the others. The men, having wiped their faces, would perhaps move towards the doorway, their attention already turning to the fields, to the animals, to the day's hard labor. Their movements were heavy, deliberate, grounded in the physical reality of their tasks. The privacy of dirt was a quiet, unstated agreement, a communal understanding. There was no shame in the faint scent of unwashed skin, no judgment in the presence of dust on clothing. These were simply facets of existence, shared by all, inherent to the daily struggle for sustenance and survival. The eyes of others did not linger in judgment, but passed over, accepting this state as the natural order of things. One's physical body, in its raw, unadorned state, was simply a part of the working world, to be maintained for function, not for an aesthetic ideal of cleanliness. The light outside continued its slow, inexorable climb, filling the world with its steady, unwavering presence. The sounds of the village became a little clearer, a little more active, but still contained, still part of the quiet hum of communal life. Within the small wooden house, the morning silence, though broken by the gentle sounds of awakening, still held a profound quality of introspection, of a world experienced deeply through the senses, a world where the body, in its natural state, was simply present, without comment, without judgment. The faint scent of the unwashed linen of the bedding, its familiar staleness, completed the immersive sensory picture, a constant, underlying note in the symphony of smells that defined this living space. The scent of wood smoke and damp earth continued to fill the small wooden house, a constant, underlying note in the quiet rhythm of the morning. The light, now fully present, illuminated the familiar objects within. The rough-hewn table, the simple benches, the straw scattered on the floor. Hands moved with the accustomed motions of daily tasks, stoking the fire, preparing a meager meal, mending a torn garment. The air carried the subtle blend of human presence, of wool and straw, and the lingering wood smoke from the hearth. This was the ordinary, the ceaseless flow of life. Yet for some, on certain days, the rhythm might subtly shift, pulled by an unspoken understanding, a collective memory of a different kind of cleansing. Beyond the familiar confines of the dwelling, a particular structure stood at the edge of the village, separate from the cluster of homes and the animal byres. It was a humble building, often low-slung, made of rough timber or unadorned stone, its roof typically of earth or heavy thatch. From its small, infrequent opening, a faint, persistent wisp of steam might occasionally rise, a soft breath against the cool air. This was the bathhouse, a place distinct from the everyday, a space where the usual routines of the body were momentarily set aside. The path leading to it was often trodden smooth, worn by generations of feet seeking its unique warmth. The ground around it might feel slightly warmer, a subtle emanation from the heated interior. Entering this structure was a transition, a step from the cool, earthy air of the outside world into a different atmosphere. The initial sensation was one of enveloping warmth, a heavy, humid embrace that immediately began to loosen the tautness in muscles, to soothe the chill that clung to the skin. The light inside was always dim, struggling to penetrate small, high openings or filtered through dense smoke. It was a subdued light, casting long, wavering shadows, making forms indistinct, blurring the edges of the space. Faces were softened, figures less defined, creating an environment of quiet intimacy, where individual identities receded slightly in the diffused glow. The air was thick with steam, a moist, palpable presence that carried the distinct scents of hot stones, of damp wood, and of human bodies. This was not the sharp, clean steam of boiling water, but a heavier, more organic vapor, imbued with the ancient smell of heated rock and the subtle aroma of wood, slowly drying in intense warmth. A deep, resonant heat emanated from a pile of stones, often in the center of the room, heated over a slow, smoldering fire. These stones, dark and glistening with moisture, radiated a profound, pervasive warmth that permeated every part of the structure, warming the very ground beneath the feet. Around the edges of the room, or sometimes tiered against a central hearth, stood low benches of rough-hewn wood. Their surfaces, smoothed by countless bodies, were warm to the touch, sometimes even hot, radiating the deep heat of the stones. These benches were the primary gathering places within the bathhouse, the sites of quiet repose and the subtle rituals of communal cleansing. The wood, dark with age and moisture, felt solid and unyielding beneath the seated or reclining forms. Within this dim, steamy warmth, naked bodies moved or rested in a profound silence. The initial entry might be marked by a faint cough as the heavy air entered the lungs, or the soft thump of clothing being shed onto a pile near the entrance. But once inside, a quiet settled upon those present. There was no casual chatter, no boisterous laughter. Instead, a shared understanding of the space, of its purpose, fostered a deep quiet. The only sounds were those of the body itself. The soft hiss of water poured onto hot stones, releasing a fresh burst of steam. The steady, rhythmic sounds of heavy breathing, the gentle dripping of condensation from the wooden ceiling or walls. Each sound was amplified by the enveloping quiet, yet seemed to belong a natural part of the bathhouse's unique acoustic landscape. The gestures within this space were ritual gestures, performed with a quiet intent. Hands might reach for a wooden scoop, its handle smooth from use, to ladle water onto the glowing stones, a deliberate action to generate more steam, more heat. The body would then be exposed fully to this intense heat, allowing the pores to open, the surface of the skin to grow slick with moisture. It was a process of opening, of release. Then came the birch branches. Bundles of fresh or dried birch branches, sometimes oak or other fragrant leaves, hung near the heated stones, their leaves crisp or pliant, depending on the season. A hand would take a bundle, its dry leaves rustling softly. These branches were dipped into cool water, then brought to the skin, first gently, then with increasing vigor. The sensation was immediate, a sharp yet invigorating slap. The light sting of the leaves against the reddened skin. The scent of crushed leaves, green and earthy, mingled with the pervasive steam, creating a distinct aromatic cloud around the body. This act of beating the skin with branches was not punitive, but therapeutic, designed to stimulate the blood, to open the pores further, to physically awaken the surface of the body. The rhythmic slapping sound, a soft percussive beat, was a constant, almost hypnotic backdrop in the steamy quiet. Sweat flowed freely. It beaded on the forehead, ran in rivulets down the back, dampened the hair. It was a tangible manifestation of the body's response to the intense heat, a physical purging. The smell of sweat, raw and immediate, mingled with the other scents in the air, creating a potent, earthy aroma. It was not a smell of shame, but of exertion, of release. And through this, whispers might occasionally break the silence. Not sharp, distinct words, but low, murmured sounds, barely audible, perhaps a quiet sigh of contentment, a soft groan of physical effort, or an almost silent communication between two figures in the dim light. These whispers were fleeting, dissolving quickly into the encompassing steam, never disrupting the fundamental quietude of the space. Bathing as ceremony, this was the deeper meaning of the bathhouse. It was infrequent but sacred, not a daily routine, but an occasional, deliberate act of purification, of bodily renewal. It marked a deviation from the everyday, a special occasion dedicated to the care of the self, and often of the collective. The very act of entering, of shedding clothes, of submitting to the heat and the beating of the branches was a series of ritualistic steps imbued with ancient meaning. It was a time for the body to be addressed not merely as a vessel for labor, but as a site of profound experience. The heat was a transformative force, the steam a cleansing breath. For the more thorough cleansing or for special purposes, other materials might be present. Clay pots of oil sat near the warm stones, the oil within, perhaps animal fat or rendered lard, thick and viscous. Its scent, heavy and animalistic, mingled with the others. A hand might dip into the pot, spreading the thick oil across the skin, a deliberate act of anointing. The oil felt heavy, lubricating, its richness a protective layer. It would be rubbed into the skin, coating it, softening it, binding with the accumulated dirt and sweat. Sometimes a rudimentary, fat-based soap might be used. It would be a coarse substance, perhaps made from animal fats and lye, its texture rough, its scent strong and alkaline. It did not lather abundantly, but created a slick, slippery film on the skin. It was applied sparingly, rubbed in with firm hands, its purpose to break down the grease and grime, allowing it to be scraped or rinsed away. The sensation was abrasive, but effective. After the application of oil or soap, The body would be scraped clean with a piece of wood or horn, or rinsed with pitchers of water. The action slow, methodical, removing the layers of oil, sweat, and loosened dirt. And for the hair, or for a final rinse, there might be fermented rinses. These liquids, perhaps made from fermented grains or herbs, held a slightly sour, yeasty scent. Poured over the head, they would feel cool, refreshing, their acidic nature intended to cut through grease and leave the hair feeling lighter, cleaner. The droplets would run down the face, stinging slightly if they reached the eyes, but leaving behind a feeling of renewed freshness. These rinses were not for daily use, but part of the deeper, occasional ritual of thorough cleansing. The bathhouse as both comfort and suspicion. For many, it was a place of profound comfort. The warmth penetrated deep into weary muscles, soothing aches accumulated from days of hard labor. The steam opened constricted airways, easing coughs and chills. The ritual of cleansing, however infrequent, offered a physical and spiritual lightness, a feeling of renewal. It was a temporary escape from the cold, the dust, the perpetual chill of the dwelling. It was a place where the body was attended to, pampered even, in its own rough way. The deep, pervasive heat provided a solace rarely found in the harshness of daily life. Yet a subtle thread of suspicion often wove through the communal understanding of the bathhouse. For some, perhaps, the nakedness, the communal intimacy, the very intensity of the physical experience carried a faint shadow of impropriety, a lingering unease that stood apart from its clear benefits. The warmth, though comforting, could also be seen as excessive, a luxury. The very act of seeking such intense pleasure through the body might be viewed with a cautious eye by those whose lives emphasized austerity and spiritual discipline. The mingling of bodies, the release of physical inhibitions, could evoke a quiet discomfort for some, a sense that the boundaries between individuals were being subtly blurred. This suspicion was rarely voiced, but it existed as a quiet undercurrent, a tension between bodily relief and societal norms. The air inside, though warm, was also heavy, humid, sometimes making breathing feel shallow, constricted. The heat, while comforting, could also become overwhelming, inducing a lightheadedness, a sense of physical extremity. The dark, wet wood, the constant dripping of condensation, the thick, earthy smells. These contributed to an atmosphere that, while cleansing, was also profoundly sensual, drawing the body into an intense awareness of its own physicality. The feeling of the wet, hot wood against the skin of a bare back. The taste of the humid air, the visual blurring of shapes in the dimness. All these elements combined to create an experience that was both deeply physical and subtly disorienting. Leaving the bathhouse was another transition. The body, flushed and warm, would emerge into the cooler, drier air of the outside world, a sharp contrast that invigorated and sharpened the senses. The feeling of freshly cleansed skin, though fleeting, was a tangible lightness, a brief reprieve from the accumulated layers of the everyday. The sense of the wood smoke and damp earth from the village would return, but for a short while they would be overlaid with the distinct, ephemeral scent of the bathhouse itself. The lingering aroma of birch, of heated stone, of renewed skin. This feeling of fleeting cleanliness, this temporary lightness, would slowly, inevitably, begin to recede as the body returned to its daily rhythms, to its usual garments, to the constant presence of dust and labor. The memory of the warmth, however, and the quiet, ritualistic moments would linger, a subtle whisper within the deeper, unceasing flow of ordinary existence. The cool night air, when one stepped out, would feel crisp and sharp, a profound contrast to the intense heat left behind. The sounds of the night, previously muted by the thick walls, would return with startling clarity. The distant bark of a dog, the rustle of leaves, the vast, echoing silence of the open land. The memory of the bathhouse, its enveloping warmth and the fleeting scent of birch and heated stone, would slowly, inevitably, begin to recede. The body, flushed and briefly lightened, would return to the familiar textures of rough clothing, to the cool touch of the everyday air. The pervasive smells of wood smoke and damp earth, never truly absent, would reassert themselves, reclaiming their dominance. Life outside the singular, ritualistic space of the bathhouse unfolded with its constant, unyielding demands, often calling for a different kind of cleansing. One born not of ceremony, but of necessity and hard labor. Beyond the hearth, beyond the confines of the dwelling, ran the river. Its presence was constant, a murmur in the background of village life, a source of sustenance and, at times, a place of arduous toil. The path to its banks was worn smooth, leading through fields and along the edge of the woods, often muddy and slick after a rain. The air near the river was always cooler, carrying the damp, clean scent of moving water, a sharp contrast to the warmer, denser air of the village. The sound of the current, a ceaseless flow, whispered through the reeds that lined its banks, sometimes a gentle sigh, sometimes a more insistent rush, depending on the season and the recent rains. Here, at the river's edge, another form of cleansing took place, the washing of clothes in rivers. This was not a delicate task, but one of immense physical exertion, a chore demanding strength and endurance. The water, often cold, seeped into the very bones, numbing the fingers, chilling the limbs. It was drawn up in buckets, or the clothes themselves were plunged directly into the flowing current, their heavy, sodden weight a dead pull against the hands. The rough fabric of tunics, shifts, and blankets became heavy, resistant, absorbing the water and multiplying its weight. The labor was hard. Garments were laid out on flat, smooth stones along the bank, or on thick wooden boards, their surfaces slick with water and slim. They were beaten with heavy wooden paddles, the rhythmic thud echoing across the water, a dull percussive sound that spoke of ceaseless effort. The force of the beating loosened the ingrained dirt and grime, sending clouds of cloudy water swirling into the clear current. Hands rubbed the coarse fabric, their knuckles red and chafed from the friction. The water, cold and relentless, flowed over and around the struggling forms, carrying away the released impurities. The ground around the washing stones was perpetually muddy, churned by countless feet and the constant splashing of water. The rich, earthy smell of wet mud mingled with the dampness of the river, a primal scent that clung to clothing and skin. Fingers, numb with cold, would press into the thick, yielding mud, finding purchase against the slippery bank. Splashes of cold, dirty water would inevitably spray onto faces, onto hair, cooling the skin but adding another layer of dampness and earth. Even with this strenuous effort, a complete cleansing, a pristine state, was rarely achieved. The texture of fabric remained coarse, often stiffened by the drying process, never truly soft. The faint, ingrained sense of human use, of smoke and sweat, would lessen, but rarely disappear entirely. The water, though cold and flowing, could only remove so much, and on the body itself, a different, persistent struggle continued. Despite all efforts, lice, fleas, and ash dust rubbed into skin were constants of daily life. Lice, tiny, almost invisible creatures, inhabited the hair, their subtle movement a familiar, incessant itch on the scalp. Fingers would often unconsciously reach to scratch, to dig, a futile attempt to dislodge the pervasive irritation. Fleas, even smaller, would find purchase in the coarse wool of garments, their sharp, quick bites a sudden, irritating prick on the skin, causing a swift, instinctive slap or rub. These tiny inhabitants were an accepted part of existence, their presence unavoidable, their constant irritation a low thrum beneath the surface of awareness. And the ash dust, fine and pervasive, from the constant hearth fires, from the very air of the dwelling, settled everywhere. It accumulated in the hair, on the skin, especially in the folds of garments, in the creases of the body. It imparted a dry, slightly gritty texture to the skin, a faint, mineral smell. It was rubbed in by the constant friction of clothing, by the casual touch of hands. It was a layer that could never truly be removed, a constant companion binding with the natural oils and sweat of the body, forming a subtle, inseparable film. This was the unavoidable consequence of living closely with fire, a constant fine precipitation that coated everything. The approach to cleansing also shifted with the turning of the year, dictated by the relentless progression of the seasonal differences. In summer, the river, though still cool, offered a more accessible, less arduous opportunity for a more thorough wash. Water could be scooped into summer buckets, carried to a more secluded spot, perhaps a sun-warmed hollow, where the air was milder. Here, a full dousing of the body might occur, a brief, invigorating immersion in cool, clear water. The sun on the skin afterwards, the quick drying on the warm air, offered a temporary lightness, a fleeting sense of fresh skin. The scent of wild herbs might drift on the warmer breezes, mingling with the clean smell of the river water. But with the approach of winter, the river's icy grip made such efforts impossible. Its surface would often freeze, or its waters would become too frigid to touch without severe pain. The daily regimen of maintaining a degree of cleanliness shifted dramatically. The bathhouse, with its intense heat, became an even more infrequent luxury, reserved for special needs or extreme chill. Instead, the body relied more heavily on winter smoke rub-downs. In the depths of winter, with the cold seeping into the very walls of the house, warmth became paramount. The hearth fire was a constant presence, its smoke filling the dwelling, clinging to every surface. For a kind of cleansing, the body might be exposed to this smoke. One might sit close to the fire, allowing the warm, pungent smoke to envelop the skin, to penetrate the hair and clothing. A rough cloth, perhaps previously held over the fire to warm, would then be rubbed vigorously over the skin, a dry friction intended to remove the surface layer of dust and grime, to absorb some of the oils. The sensation was warm, comforting, but also slightly suffocating, the air thick with particles. The smell of smoke, now ingrained, became the dominant personal scent, masking other odors, a protective, insulating layer. For various ailments, or simply for a sense of refreshment, herbal infusions might be used. Bundles of dried herbs, chamomile, lavender, mint, or stronger, more medicinal plants, would be steeped in hot water, creating fragrant, often bitter-smelling liquids. These infusions, once cooled to a tolerable temperature, might be poured over the head, allowing the scented water to trickle down the body. The sensation was soothing, the herbal scents momentarily masking the deeper, more pervasive odors. The hair might feel slightly softer, infused with the natural extracts. These were not potent cleansers, but rather temporary refreshers, offering a sensory comfort. And for times of deeper malaise, or for a more intense purification, smoke baths might be employed. Not just the ambient smoke of the hearth, but a more concentrated application. Perhaps a small enclosed space within the dwelling would be filled with dense smoke from burning fragrant woods or herbs. The body would be brought into this space, enveloped completely by the warm, pungent vapor. The skin would prickle, the eyes would sting, and the lungs would draw in the heavy, aromatic air. This was less about removing visible dirt and more about a perceived spiritual or medicinal purification, driving out chills or perceived humors through intense heat and aromatic fumes. The experience was profound, almost hallucinatory, the senses overwhelmed by the dense, warm smoke. Vinegar, with its sharp, acidic tang, also played a role in this limited regimen. Diluted in water, it might be used as a rinse for the hair, its acidity cutting through grease and leaving the hair feeling lighter, cleaner, if somewhat brittle. Its sharp smell, briefly dominant, then dissipated, leaving a faint, clean note. It might also be dabbed onto the skin for certain irritations, its cool, biting sensation providing temporary relief. It was a harsh, functional substance, offering a bracing, if not truly cleansing effect. The body as both sacred and resigned. This was a complex truth of existence. It was sacred in its capacity for life, for labor, for procreation, for its connection to the divine spirit. Its rhythms, its needs, its eventual decay were understood as part of a larger, sacred order. Yet there was also a profound resignation to its physical state. Its constant exposure to the elements, to dirt, to parasites, to the wear and tear of daily life, was simply accepted. This was its natural condition. The concept of maintenance without expectation permeated this approach to the body. One maintained it for function, for survival, for health within the constraints of the world. Hands were washed before eating for practical reasons of health and courtesy. Faces might be wiped, hair combed, clothes occasionally beaten clean. But there was no expectation of a constant, invisible freshness, no striving for an unattainable state of pristine purity. The body, in its natural state, was always subtly present. Its smells, its textures, its small irritations, an undeniable part of its lived reality. This acceptance fostered a different relationship with the physical self, one less driven by aesthetic ideals and more by practical necessity and a quiet, ancient understanding of its inherent, earthy nature. The slight stickiness of skin, the persistent warmth of unwashed fabric, the faint, pervasive odors. These were simply the way the body was, lived in, worked in, a vessel for the journey through this immediate, tangible world. The cool water of the river, the rough texture of the cloth, the pervasive dust, all contributed to this ongoing cyclical process of being. The subtle echoes of the river, its cold water and the arduous labor of washing, would gradually recede from the forefront of awareness. The fleeting memory of the bathhouse, its enveloping steam and temporary lightness, would become a faint whisper against the constant presence of the everyday. Life, in its unending cycle of demands and rhythms, continued to unfold within the familiar textures and scents of the dwelling and the surrounding village. The body, constantly exposed to the elements and to the tasks of living, settled into its accustomed state, a pervasive presence of earth and human warmth. Within the confines of the small house, the air remained a tapestry of familiar smells, the ever-present wood smoke from the hearth mingling with the earthy scent of straw and the specific, subtle aroma of human skin and unwashed wool. These odors did not announce themselves loudly, but rather existed as an inherent part of the atmosphere, a quiet confirmation of existence. The light, filtering through small openings, illuminated dust motes dancing in the air, tiny particles that settled on every surface, clinging to every fiber of clothing, to every strand of hair. This was the constant, unyielding reality, the feel of never being fully clean and no one expecting it. The body carried its layers of the world. A faint stickiness might persist on the skin, a subtle film of oil and fine dust. The hair, though combed, would retain a certain heaviness, its natural oils mingling with the pervasive scent of smoke. Under the rough layers of wool and linen, the skin would often feel slightly gritty, a testament to the constant friction of fabric against body, of the invisible particles that settled everywhere. There was no sensation of absolute freshness, no pristine state to be achieved or maintained. This feeling of an underlying, persistent presence, a subtle film that coated everything, was simply the way the body was experienced. It was the norm, the common ground shared by all. This state of being, where absolute cleanliness was neither sought nor expected, meant that dirt as normalcy became an unspoken truth. The presence of grime on hands, the faint dust on faces, the earthy stains on clothing, these were not marks of neglect or shame. Instead, they were signs of work, piety, or humility. A man's calloused hands, ingrained with the dark soil of the fields, spoke of his labor, of his engagement with the earth that sustained the community. The dark smudges of soot on a woman's face, near the eyes, hinted at long hours spent by the hearth, cooking and keeping the fire alive, a testament to her constant effort within the home. The worn, stained fabric of clothing, patched and repatched, held the story of countless days of toil, of bending over the loom, of working in the fields, of tending to animals. It was a visual record of life lived, of sustenance earned. For some, a deliberate lack of attention to personal appearance, a certain earthiness, could even be a sign of piety, a rejection of worldly vanity, a focus on the spiritual rather than the superficial. For others, it was simply an expression of humility, an acceptance of one's place within the natural order, where the body was a tool for living, not an object of constant adornment or meticulous purification. There was no striving for an artificial, pristine appearance, but rather an acceptance of the body's natural state as a reflection of its function and its connection to the earth. This acceptance extended to the very air around each person. The scent of a person is identity, not shame. Each individual carried a unique aroma, a complex blend of ingrained body odor, the lingering scent of their clothing, infused with wood smoke, wool, and the faint tang of daily exertion, and the subtle presence of their environment. This personal scent was not something to be hidden or masked. It was an inherent part of who they were, a recognizable signature. A mother might know her child not only by sight or touch, but by their specific scent, a comforting familiarity. A man might recognize his neighbor in the dimness by the particular blend of smoke and field he carried. These individual scents mingled within the close confines of the home, creating a collective aroma unique to each household, a familiar blend that enveloped its inhabitants. When walking through the village, the air carried the faint, shifting tapestry of these personal and communal scents. A subtle language spoken by the unseen. There was no judgment in these aromas, no sense of shame attached to them. They were simply facts of existence, as natural and unquestioned as the rising sun or the turning of the seasons. The absence of mirrors, of a constant visual self-assessment, further reinforced this reliance on other senses for identity and connection. The body, in its full aromatic presence, was simply acknowledged, a part of the vibrant living world. What did clean mean before the modern idea of hygiene? It meant something profoundly different, a concept rooted not in the removal of every visible particle or microbe, but in a deeper, more holistic understanding of the body's place in the world. To be clean might have meant to be free from ritual impurity, to be prepared for sacred rites, or simply to be functionally ready for the day's labor. It was a practical, sometimes spiritual state, far removed from the sterile, odorless ideals that would emerge in later centuries. For people of this time, the body was not a separate entity to be constantly sanitized and protected from its environment. Instead, it was fundamentally intertwined with the earth, with animals, with the very air it breathed. The dust that settled on skin and clothing, the sweat that accumulated from labor, the earthy smell of the land. These were not external contaminants to be eradicated, but intrinsic elements of a lived existence. To be clean, in this context, meant living in harmony with these realities rather than striving against them. It meant understanding that the body was porous, receptive, constantly exchanging with its surroundings. The physical sensations of their lives, the rough texture of their clothes, the coldness of well water, the pervasive scent of smoke, shaped their very perception of the world. Cleanliness was thus a matter of layers, of processes, rather than absolute states. A wash in the river removed some of the visible dirt, but left the deeper, ingrained presence of living. A visit to the bathhouse offered a temporary, intense purification, a feeling of renewal, but it was understood to be fleeting, a momentary break from the norm. The acceptance of a constant, underlying layer of accumulated presence, of dust, of natural oils, of personal scent, fostered a different relationship with the self. There was no relentless pursuit of an invisible, odorless ideal. Instead, identity was perhaps more strongly tied to the tangible, to the felt body, to its inherent smell, to the signs of labor and life it carried. A person's scent became a part of their unique presence, recognized and accepted by those around them, rather than a source of shame to be masked. What did it mean to live like this? It meant a profound humility, an acceptance of human limitations in the face of nature's power. It meant that comfort was often found not in absence of dirt, absence of smell, but in presence. The warmth of the fire, the rough comfort of wool, the familiar scent of loved ones. It meant that community was built on a shared physical reality, where everyone lived within similar sensory parameters, where personal boundaries were perhaps more permeable, less rigidly defined by concepts of individual hygiene. It meant that the relationship with one's own body was more functional, more integrated into the daily rhythm of survival. The body was a tool, a vessel, to be maintained for its purpose, for its ability to work, to create, to endure. Its physical state, its smells and textures were simply aspects of its being, not a constant source of anxiety or an endless project of perfection. This was a life lived close to the earth, close to the raw, unadorned truth of human existence, where the subtle, lingering presence of life's daily traces was simply the way of the world. There was a quiet dignity in this acceptance, a deep, unspoken understanding of the body as a part of the natural cycle, perpetually connected to the dust from which it came and to which it would return. As the day began its slow, inevitable descent towards evening, the light in the small wooden house softened, turning from the clear brightness of midday to the warm, elongated hues of late afternoon. The dust motes, which had danced so brightly in the strong sunbeams, now seemed to glow with a softer, gentler light, their dance slowing, becoming more languid. The air, which had carried the sense of morning tasks and human presence, began to still, losing some of its earlier movement. A hand might reach out slowly to pick up a simple wooden cup from the table. Its surface, worn smooth by countless touches, felt cool and dry. A finger, with its own subtle layers of accumulated presence, would trace the rim, then move to wipe gently at a faint layer of dust that had settled on its surface. The dust, fine and almost imperceptible, would adhere to the skin, a fleeting transfer of the world's particles. This gesture, simple and repeated countless times, was a quiet acknowledgement of the pervasive nature of their environment. A small, unremarked act of maintenance in a world where absolute cleanliness was an unknown concept. The sound of the finger on the wood would be almost inaudible, a faint whisper in the quiet room. Outside the small, unglazed windows, the light continued its slow fading. The vibrant colors of the fields, the stark lines of the bare trees, would soften, their edges blurring as the shadows lengthened and deepened. The sounds of the village, which had been a low hum throughout the day, would gradually recede, becoming more distant, more muffled. The occasional bark of a dog, the faint cry of a child, the distant lowing of an animal would seem to dissolve into the deepening twilight. The air outside would grow perceptibly cooler, taking on the crisp, sharp quality of the approaching night. Within the dwelling, the air would thicken once more with the comforting scent of wood smoke, as the fire in the hearth was replenished for the evening. Its crackle would be a steady, soothing rhythm, a promise of warmth against the gathering chill. The rough wool of clothing, softened by body heat and accumulated usage, would settle more comfortably against the skin, providing its familiar, subtle friction. The very breath of the inhabitants, slow and deep, would fill the quiet space. A gentle rise and fall, a confirmation of life lived in quiet communion with the dwelling. The final impression is one of timelessness, of profound stillness. The cycle of the day, of labor, of the body's simple rhythms, finds its quiet rest. The story does not end with a flourish, or a resolution, or a definitive statement. It simply fades, like the last wisp of smoke curling from a chimney, dissolving into the vast, indifferent sky. The images soften, the sounds become almost imperceptible, the sensations blur and recede. The light of day finally fades from a tired, unwashed face. The rough textures of the world, the pervasive dust, the subtle, personal scent, these remain, unremarked, unspoken. The eyes close, not in a final end, But in the profound weariness that precedes another awakening, another day of quiet existence, the story vanishes. Not with a conclusion, but with a gentle vanishing, leaving only a lingering sense of presence, a whisper of a time where life flowed in deep, unhurried currents, and the human body was simply a part of the enduring earth.